All right, so what counts as a best read of 2024? It sort of had to be a first-time read. This gets complicated later on, but I explained that with the honorable mentions. But it didn't have to be published in 2024 for a couple of reasons. The first reason being that I read so much and so widely, and I still miss out on a lot of things that I'm very excited about every year, and I think that it would really penalize any book that I didn't immediately prioritize the year it came out. Also, though, I read not, a lot of advanced copies, but enough that it would really skew things, and I would be forced not to talk about books that I was really, really excited about. No spoilers, but this year there was one that I was incredibly excited about. That was, it was one of the best books of this last year for me, and it's going to be the best book of your year this year when you buy and read it. Isn't that right? All right. Enough teasing. Let's see if I can make this function. I'm going to go from the bottom of I did a bracket. The bracket's linked on the source of the stream post. So if you click the link to the stream post, you should be able to find the bracket and the Goodreads list, which includes the honorable mentions that didn't go into the bracket. After I put them through a bracket, I then ordered them even more carefully into a top 16 list. So we will go from number 16 all the way to number 1. And then I will show you my 4 honorable mentions. And the honorable mentions were, for whatever reason, they didn't qualify. It's a funny term to use with the March Madness bracket. A March Madness bracket that we're doing in February, because I'm early this year, for once in my life. The ones that didn't qualify, that rounded out to a lovely top 20. Top 20 of 100 reads this year, which I think is not bad. All right, without further ado, because there's been so much of it. Number 16, Influenza by Jade L.P. Peters. This was a surprise. It's very cute. It's kind of what it sounds like. I don't know what it sounds like, actually. Our protagonists are social media influencers who kill zombies in the zombie apocalypse, and they live in this little bunker. It's kind of a combination slice of life, exploration of what that world would be like, and buff, butch cheesecake. My only complaint about this, and it is a pretty strong one, is this was not long enough. They came out here, they wrote a lesbian zombie slayer butch protagonist, and they said, let's just end it before we hit 100 pages. Why? I mean, it's so good, it's so fun, and I suspect that, this was the kind of thing where you do it as like a project, not so much as like, I'm going to write a graphic novel, and that's totally fine, and it's really perfect as that, but I was just reading this like, you can't just, this can't be the end. And there's also a part of me that thinks this is almost certainly not the end. This was kind of a like testing the waters thing, and they'll do more with these characters. But I was in so much pain when this finished. I just didn't understand why they would do that to me. So that's my number 16. You should read it. It's good. The Goodreads link to the list for all of these is also in the original post location. I can paste that here. It's going to be impossible to keep up with chat, but I'm going to do my best because of how I'm looking at this. I don't have my 2 monitors because my laptop broke. All right, next one. Number 15. I'm sorry, this is for some reason the highest resolution image I could get of the cover. It looks great in person. It's a really good cover. It just looks a little silly here. Honey Pygmalion. If you like, and I wrote a professional review for this year that I should really upload up to my Goodreads account so you can see it. If you liked Frankenstein and you thought to yourself, what if this was actually a very short and sweet graphic novel where the doctor is this pathetic fail loser trans guy and the monster is like a dog furry situation made out of clay, and the entire thing is illustrated digitally on top of photos of a dollhouse bought off of Facebook Marketplace. Well, good news, folks. I have the book for you. It's Pretty Pygmalion. This was so much fun. It was also a really fun surprise. Of course, it's from Silver Sprocket. I'm actually thinking about it now, and I'm realizing that I should do a direct count of how many books on the list ended up being from Silver Sprocket because it's not going to be like half the list, but it's a really sizable chunk. So that's another side recommendation, is you should also just go, if you're if you're local to somewhere in the Bay Area, somewhere near San Francisco, you should go to San Francisco and you should visit the store in person. I bought a lot of things there. It's true what they say, you can't go in and then leave without buying anything, but you should go there. They do also have a web storefront. They are really dedicated to doing indie, queer comics, graphic novels, visual things, what have you, and it shows. I particularly appreciated this last year, their dedication to just being incredibly weird and strange. Like, this book is just really bizarre. It's just really, really weird and really discomfiting. My actual one complaint about this is that there's like a kind of a hint that there may be like a tinge of like sort of like incestuous abuse possible, and then they like back away from it really quickly, which is fine, but I was like, you could have made this entire book even more interesting than it already is if you've leaned into that, because that is really peculiar and fascinating. But it's really a great example of a book that I think could only have been published by the specific publisher that took it, because it is so, so delightfully weird. It's really bizarre. Please read it. Number 14. Rosemary Valero O'Connell's Don't Go Without Me. This is also by Silver Sprocket. So I'm sensing a pattern. I'm going to start keeping track. I think I should go back and note, just for full clarity, this was originally for the Short Box Comic Fair. So it was, by definition, it had to be a short comic. But there's no excuse to not continue this. I know this is not the end of their story. Okay. 14. Don't Go Without Me by Rosemary Valero O'Connell. It's a collection of 3 short stories, short comics. The book itself is still very small. This is my favorite type of graphic novel, where it's printed very large, so you get all of the detail, the beauty, the color, but the book itself is very thin. So you really get to focus on it as almost walking through an art gallery. I think it's the best way to appreciate the book. The art is so beautiful. Every page looks like this cover. It is so gorgeous. It explores a lot of, and I know that this is overused, but genuinely liminality and strangeness in between things and peculiar worlds. I do think you should just read it and don't worry about what I have to say about the specific stories, because that's how I enjoyed it. And I really liked just opening it, and things would unfold in front of me, and I would appreciate them as they happened. I'm going to comp this to On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden, both for how beautiful the art is. I would say this art is even more detailed, the color is even more, it's just gorgeous, but also because of some of the queer speculative vibes. If you don't know On a Sunbeam, you should read that too, but that wasn't the first read for me this last year. Just a really gorgeous book. The stories are really sweet. They're really fascinating. It's hard to talk about it without getting to show you the inside. I'm just looking at the cover here, but the panel work is really beautiful and expressive. I'm just a big fan of this artist. I've been waiting to read this for so long. Very glad I finally got to it. How It All Ends by Emma Hunsinger. So if you remember Emma Hunsinger, presumably it's from the viral comic How to Draw a Horse. Oh, hello, Kinkery. Happy first time chat. Welcome in. Thank you for coming by. How It All Ends. So I reviewed this professionally. I received an arc. It doesn't affect the fact that I thought it was one of the best books of the year. I received a lot of arcs for a lot of things. This to me was, if you read How to Draw a Horse and you thought, wow, well, I hope this person does a graphic novel. She did. She did. It's really good. I was in kind of a funk the week that I got this, and I took it home, and I don't remember the exact context of what was even happening. I think I had to like get my phone fixed. I've had a weird year for electronics, folks. And I was reading this on the bus. I was reading it waiting for the bus. I went to 7-Eleven and got a Slurpee for my trouble and sat on the curb and read a bit more of this book. I could not stop reading. It was so good. And I was reading, mind you, not even the final. I was reading a black and white, not even like a traditionally bound arc. This was like, it wasn't a binder, but it was, as close as you can get to just handing someone a binder of pages without just doing that. Really beautiful. Gorgeous. So lovely. And I mean that not just, the art is so fun. I love how expressive it is, but also the story. I've said this before, a lot of middle grade, a lot of YA no longer hits me the way it would have if I were reading it at the proper age. This very much still worked for me. It also, I'm like, how much do I spoil about any given book? How much do I tell you about any given book? So the premise is that our protagonist has been moved up a grade and is now suddenly in middle school, but younger than everyone else in middle school, and kind of adrift and doesn't know how to do anything. There's definitely, maybe the crowd tonight is autistic. There's some stuff going on here. But also, classic, wow, this girl in my class, I am obsessed with her and dream about carrying her out of burning buildings, which could mean nothing. There are some really fun scenes of them together. Particularly, I like the without spoiling anything else, segment where our protagonist is trying to seem cool and only knows that apparently this artist she likes is not cool. So she's like, oh, I hate this artist, she sucks. And her object of affection, one could say, is like, oh, I really like her. Which I think has probably happened to everyone in the world, whether you just fully said that you think it sucks or you downplay how much you like it because you don't want to look uncool or because you think maybe it's not that good and it's just something that you really like. Classic, you take someone to a movie theater to see a movie and you're like, well, it's fine. It's okay, but it's nothing crazy, but like, I thought you should see it. And they leave and they're like, what are you talking about? That was incredible. And now you have to explain that you did really love it. It's one of your favorites, but you were afraid you would look cringe, that you'd be posting cringe and you would lose subscriber. Particularly when you are, a teen or preteen, you're very preoccupied with losing subscriber. And I feel like this entire book captured me so perfectly the fear of losing subscriber that I had in middle school, particularly. I've lost track of what number we're on, but here's Poor Dear by Clara Shetsky. I went to I don't want to call it an after party. They were going to dinner and they said, do you want to go to dinner with us? And I said, yes, and the restaurant didn't have any kosher food. So I joined the author for dinner where they proceeded to diagnose me as autistic, but that doesn't affect my review of this book either. Okay, so this is going to be a little backwards because Chouette, spoiler alert, is also on this list. It's higher up on this list. And so normally I would talk about Chouette first because it's their first book, and then I would talk about Poor Dear because it is the second, but I read it second. But we're going to talk about Poor Dear. So for those who don't know, Clara Shetsky is mother to one Patricia Taxon, who, thank God, is very autistic. Claire, when writing Chouette, was told by their publisher, why don't you go get like an autism screening? Because this is a crazy story, but this is just what happens. Why don't you go get a screening? Because if it turns out you're autistic, we can pitch his own voice, which is all the rage right now. And Claire was like, well, I really don't think I am, but okay, and went to go get a screening, and turns out was like off of the charts autistic on every measure. And that caused them to kind of look back on their childhood and realize, oh, when I was a kid, we didn't really have as much awareness about this. But maybe I was kind of a strange child that was really off-putting and didn't understand social norms. And remember that time that I almost killed someone? Well, what if I did? And then they wrote Poor Dear. This is not a spoiler because it happens very early on, but it's based on a real incident from Shetsky's life as a child, where they were playing with a child and, locked them into a trunk, essentially. And, that's the kind of thing you shouldn't do in general, but fortunately the child was as fine as you can be. And Claire actually reached out to them, as this book was coming out, and was like, well, do you remember me? I almost killed you. And they were like, yeah, I do remember that. They were like, oh, okay, great, wonderful. But obviously, had they died, you can't blame a child too much for not understanding that some things kill people, but you also kind of can resent a child for that. And the entire book is therefore, I wouldn't say an alternate history of Oshetsky's life, or childhood specifically, but it takes on a life of its own from there. And it is, it's not just Oshetsky as a child, but it's based on their experiences as a child, and particularly being a child who's autistic, but no one knows or cares and just thinks that you're basically a changeling for, not understanding the social norms of other people. The title is really fun also. I feel like there's just so many little things to shout out about this book that are so delightful. The prose is great. The title, Poor Dear, comes from the character hearing someone say, poor dear, and kind of envisioning a horrible haunted deer thing that will then proceed to haunt her throughout the book as a manifestation of her guilt. Also, some really, not every author understands the particular crossover of when you are gay and don't know you're gay, but you're also autistic and don't know you're autistic. And so you just don't, any interaction you have with a woman is kind of just a series of vibes. Really perfectly done here, which also seems to be a theme for Hachette, but I won't get too into that. Great book. You should read it. The amount of behind the scenes I've got on this book is still not enough, but I've really enjoyed hearing about it. It's really delightful. And also, I just love the cover. Like, let's pause here, just appreciate this kind of woodblock vibe and the dual tone. So many covers have gotten so much more simplistic this year, but this is one for which it just perfectly works. I love it. Okay. Roaming by the Tamaki cousins. So anytime Jillian, Mariko, Tamaki do anything, you know that's going to end up on my best of list because they're incredible, because their books are so good. And every one of their books is, one of my favorites of all time at this point. But this one specifically does a lot of things for me. So the first thing I will say is, for the last several years, I have been living in a kind of liminal hell. I've used the word twice now, but that's okay, I'm allowed to. Where people keep pitching books as butch, or putting women on the cover that look butch, or are dressed masculinely, or just androgynously, and then I take the book home and I read it, and the butch isn't even butch, or God forbid, and let me not get too specific, but she listens to Taylor Swift, and I just really am struggling. I am really struggling to find books that have butch characters. This is not me saying that the only good thing, or even the best thing about this book is that it has a butch somewhere in it, but I do think it's worth noting that in a world where people will continuously advertise books to you and say that there's a butch somewhere, and there never ever is. And I know that I also talk about Influenza, which does also have a butch character. But this, oh my goodness. I love the Greek text. This in particular is really wonderful because if anyone in the chat is butch and recalls a specific experience of being a baby butch, and maybe not even really knowing you were butch or describing yourself that way, but just, shaving your head the once and going, this feels really great, but I'm not going to examine that right now because I don't really have the bandwidth, because I have other mental problems, because I'm young. This is the book for you. This is the book about you directly. So our protagonist is going to New York with a friend that she has not seen in a long time. Friend shows up. Friend has brought her other friend, who's at the bottom left here. I think the official blurb calls her Mercurial, which is definitely the word. I don't even want to call her a femme because I'm sorry, but she is so awful. / pause, but still, I don't even want to give her the dignity of calling her a femme. And there's a lot of, kind of everything you can imagine from this scenario happens in the best of ways. There are friendship issues and drama caused by literally every person involved in the situation. There's some flirting that characters are or are not ready for. There's some, being recognized as butch before you're ready for it. There's so much going on in this book. Beautiful graphic novel. It's one of the thicker ones to come out recently, which makes me so happy because I think that a lot of people look at a thick graphic novel and they go, oh, it's a big book, it's going to be scary and long. They're not long. They look long. They're pictures. They're pictures, everyone. It's not going to be, 400 pages of text for you to read. Also, this is all in New York, which I also just thought was such a fun element, that the overstimulating atmosphere of New York City works so well for the emotions in the book. It just fit together perfectly. It was every decision made in this book assisted everything else. So much fun. Really emotional, really meaningful to me. Really recommend reading this. If anything I just said is like, I'd like a book that did that. You should read this book because it does all those things very well. It's also just a great travel log. It's very fun. I love the Statue of Liberty in the bottom right of this cover. And we just slap an NYC pin on the bottom left. So wonderful. I didn't want to leave it, but it also has a great, it's, you know, everything about it is perfect. Oh, and just watching their art develop over the last, you know, decade, it's just such a privilege. Just, it's such a good book. Please read this book. Okay. Speaking of women, Butch's graphic novel. Okay, so the cover I pasted here appears to have been cut off, and I'm sorry about that. But Smut Peddler's My Monster Girlfriend. So I will say, technically, I was reading it for the second time, I believe. I think I read this for the first time 2023. But for whatever reason, it didn't come up on my best of, and that just seemed like a crime. So it's on this best of list. And if you want to knock it out and say, well, this doesn't count, fine, then tune out, I guess, but it's your loss. Smut Peddler already had an anthology called My Monster Boyfriend. I remember at the time, I said very clearly, why are there no women? What about non-binary people? Because I'm insufferable. And I was like, you know, men are great. They're not, but let's say men are great for the sake of argument. You know, gay men are great. But where are the women? And so finally, they've done it. I do think this was their plan all along, right? But I'm hoping they do a My Monster partner that's completely ungendered. It's, you know, you can make them non-binary, you can make them, you know, you can have multiple, whatever. And a lot of these, to their credit, a lot of these stories have multiple monster girlfriends, which was really a delight for me. So many really excellent stories that have stuck with me. I actually, this year, I read this book twice because, you know, the first time I read it to read it. I was reading Wicked, which comes up on this list in a truly miraculous fashion, no spoilers. But I was reading Wicked, and for those who don't know, the book is very gay, but nothing that you want to come to pass regarding the homosexuality happens. It really blue balls me. And I was so distressed after finishing it that I went and got this off the shelf and reread this for the second time this year. It is a compilation, that's correct. Thank you, Theo. Because I just needed some women to have sex with each other. And if you also need that, this is the book for you. It's an anthology. If you don't know of Smut Peddler, I should really have given the Smut Peddler introduction. They are a generally queer-focused erotica comics anthology publishing series. There's Smut Peddler 2012, 2014. Oh god, I'm going to try to do it in order. My Monster Boyfriend, Sex Machine, that's the robot one. Silver, which is the, like, middle-aged plus one. And then My Monster Girlfriend, I think I'm definitely missing one there. But I own all of them. They're just on a shelf in a different room. Truly excellent. You should read all the Smut Peddler books, but in particular, you should read this one because there are so many women and some of them are monsters. I would shout out specific ones, but genuinely there's too many to shout out, so I will just say that you should buy and read it. It's just very, very good. Also worth noting that this is published by, not Silver Sprocket, but Iron Circus Comics, which is another tiny comic press. So I am noticing a theme with the kind of books I like, that I should maybe consider in the future when I think about what to read. All right, and I think this was number, maybe we're at number 10. I'm not sure, but we're getting somewhere. Oh my god, it's also low quality. Okay, you have to bear with me on this one. So let me tell you about Jason Shiga. So Jason Shiga is probably the person pushing comics boundaries the most right now in terms of interactivity and game qualities. This man is so smart on every level. I mean, from the game design to the amount of math involved in not just coming up with this, but then putting it into a book and formatting the whole thing to make sense. You might remember his book Meanwhile, which was, I feel like everyone my age remembers Meanwhile as like that book that I was obsessed with, I either owned or I got from the library, but at any rate, read many, 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 many times. Let's see if I can find a link to it on Goodreads. And it did get a 10-year anniversary edition recently. in 2020, I believe, if you can believe that. So if you remember this, or if you don't remember this, first of all, I do recommend that you read Meanwhile, just so you can see how far he's come, and also because it's really good. But his main thing is choose your own adventure comics and graphic novels. This is a series he's been doing for the last couple of years. Adventure Game Comics. One has been coming out each year. I believe there's a fourth one in the wings for next August. I would have to double check all of my back end information for that. But suffice to say, this has been a series, Adventure Game Comics, of interactive choose your own adventure comics. And particularly what is really, really interesting to me is that each one has used the medium differently. There has been a different twist, a different, you know, it's hard to say like different gameplay, because you're thinking like it's a choose your own adventure graphic novel. How different can it be? It's different. Every single one has a different element to it, a different, like, you know, add this number to whatever page you want to go to, do this, do that. This one in particular, I just have to say, I understand that I'm talking about a children's book, but my one, and I'm putting complaint in major quotes here, is that I could not figure out how to beat this book. I couldn't figure it out. I had to flip through the whole thing, which, yes, is cheating, but in my defense, I had played through every other route at that point. And I was losing my mind, and I just flipped through the book, and when I realized what it was and how clever it was, I honestly wasn't sure that a child would be able to figure it out. Now, with that said, I'm not very good at playing video games, as evidenced by how long it took me to play Superliminal. So I'm not saying this as like an actual diss on the book. I'm really saying it more to say that if you're an adult and you're like, I'm not going to read this as a comic for children, I don't care. First of all, well, a lot of books on this list are, you know, books for children. Many books for children are just very good and everyone should read them anyway, and you shouldn't be worried about the age range that a book is targeted to, because if you are an adult, you should be able to read whatever you like. But particularly, if you are looking at this and you're like, is this really just... No, it is so much fun. It is so much fun. I was so annoyed every time I was flipping through this thing and someone would interrupt me or ask me a question like, please, I need to focus right now. I'm shifting to ninja mode. It was just so much fun. It was such a fun book. It's the perfect length. It's really delightful. In general, I will also say that my pitch for these every single time has been, if you know a child who does not want to read books, and their parents want them to read books, and this child is really into video games, especially RPGs, give them this series. I've had a lot of success with pitching this to parents that way. I personally would say that these are the only books I've ever read where I felt like I was playing a video game. It's kind of the same way that if you're playing like a tabletop RPG, you know that it's an RPG, but the method of interaction is different. These books feel that way, where it's like an RPG, but the method of interaction is different. Very pleasant, just literally a nice experience, a genuinely really lovely time just to read through any one of these. And it makes me sad that, you know, because it's a book for children, a lot of people are not going to give the time of day and are not going to see what he's doing with comics, interactive comics right now, and it makes me really sad because it's so good, it's so wonderful, and I hope that he does a version of this for adults, but I also can imagine that, like, trying to pitch this kind of thing for adults, people are too pretentious and might not be open to publishing or reading that, but I don't care. He's a genius, and adults should read his books regardless of how they are pitched. Another children's book, another great children's graphic novel, Jen Wang's Ash's Cabin. So Jen Wang, you might know from the big one, the really big one that she did was The Prince and the Dressmaker. Before that, she illustrated the comic In Real Life, which Cory Doctorow wrote. Somewhere in between, we have Stargazing. I think after Prince and the Dressmaker, she released Stargazing, also an excellent book. And this, I believe, therefore, is her fourth. Excellent author, excellent artist. Really feel like the research and effort is so obvious in this book. I was so lucky to get an advance copy. There was like one hanging around, and someone managed to hand it to me, and I was just like, I took it home and I read it one day. It was so good. It was so good. One of my personal favorite ways to pitch this is that adults of a certain perspective get really stressed reading this book and almost get upset because the main character... Have we stopped? There we go. Sorry, it's just like flashing in and out. This is very much a my side of the mountain for a new generation. And the main character, Ash, who is non-binary, diversity win, this child is going to die in the wilderness, non-binary. Don't worry, no spoilers. But Ash is frustrated by everything, the climate crisis, the fact that no one seems to care about it, the fact that their parents don't gender them correctly, the fact that people are rude to them at school. It's kind of a classic. If anyone has ever, experienced being a child and just wondering why everything is so horrible all the time, this is for you. And their solution to, the climate issue is to go and live in the woods, is to just leave. Go to the woods and find their grandfather's cabin. No, they don't know where it is. No one knows where it is. But they're just going to find it. Their dog is there also, so everything's going to be fine. And so you can imagine my parents were very stressed about this. I had at least one adult tell me, they were like, oh, but they left without even, it seems horrible to do to their parents. And I was like, okay. It is not really a concern that works on me personally, because I wrote exhaustively. And I also heard the concern of like, oh, it's just so hard to read because it's a child in the wilderness. And I will say, I also felt that way, that reading it was very stressful in a good way, in the way that you, I think, want from a book. You want that tension where, a child may think, I'm going to go into the woods and I'm going to be completely fine. And there's not going to be any problems and I'm going to totally know everything. No, you won't, right? Like, even if you know, and to their credit, they research, they watch some YouTube videos on how to, grow food and how to forage and how to, hunt for small animals. But this does not a survivalist make. And it's definitely a stressful book to read as an adult because you see through all the holes in their logic and you very much are terrified for their life at all times. But that isn't a bad thing, in my opinion. I really enjoyed it. And I felt it was actually, just the tension was so much higher than if I had been reading it as a child. With that said, I also gave it to my younger siblings, and they also liked it. So, an all ages romp through dying in the woods. I should stop saying that, but I really was so stressed the entire time I was reading this. I highly recommend it. It's a lot higher tension than you might expect. And just a bonus shout out, this should be the norm, but there are at least some references to the indigenous peoples who lived in the area before and their way of interacting with the land, which, again, should just be a given for any of these, like survivalist books, but it felt like at least we have this now. And it's another reason I would really recommend this to anyone who's doing that, like, oh, I liked Hatchet, I like My Side of the Mountain, but I wish that it was a book that wasn't about a young white boy in, a clean, untouched wilderness. It's that kind of book. It is what I would recommend for that audience. Interestingly, and also like the fact that it's a graphic novel, is different from the fact that most of these books are just text, but it worked perfectly. And it is beautiful. The watercolors, just a gorgeous book. Highly recommend. Okay. I should have segued this better. If you were listening to me talk about how parents wish that their children would tell them before running into the wilderness, if you were listening to that and you thought to yourself, well, I don't care because parents are evil, welcome to Daddy Issues by Catherine Angel. This is an interesting one to pitch or discuss. I made the mistake of bringing this up in the family WhatsApp. Really great conversation we had. I don't know if anyone learned anything, but I did talk about the inherently incestuous nature of the traditional father-daughter relationship. And that's kind of my pitch for this book, is that if you want to just sound like a broken person after reading this, if you want to just scare people with what's on your mind, if you want to be able to just be standing there looking off in the middle distance and have someone say, and what are you thinking about? And just have to go silent because you can't say anything because you're going to be fired. This is the book for you, everybody. It's really what it says on the tin. The author goes through a bunch of different pieces of media and a bunch of different just like facts about how we look at society and the state of, fathers today, and unpicks the way in which we look at these things. It's not the most explicitly family abolitionist text, but it is kind of essential to me. And I just thought it was so fascinating. It's such an easy read, despite the content. It's actually very concise. It's a really lovely, small, like pocket book, I would say. And I read it personally as a digital edition. I went back and forth between the physical and digital because I'm terrible reading digitally. But this is a book you read very quickly. There's not a lot of jargon. It's just very easy to understand, to grasp. And the problem with that is that you will go from being kind of normal to never being normal again, and you will ruin the lives of everyone around you. With that said, you should read the book. It's really good. I thought a lot of things, took a lot of notes. I bookmarked a lot of things. I will see how K Radier turns out now, because I have been changed. For good, who knows? Highly recommend. Palestine by Joe Sacco. Also not the highest resolution cover on here. So this one came out a really long time ago, but for reasons no one can imagine, we got a new edition of this book this past year. It has a new introduction. It has, an afterword. This is Joe Sacco's, it's the work he's the most known for, and he's a comic journalist who pretty much goes into war zones and talks about it. In this case, very interestingly, he's really framing himself as, and I think that this is, to be fair, accurate, the, generic racist white tourist who goes to particularly the West Bank and Gaza. And this is in the 90s. So I should note that a lot of things have changed. Unfortunately, much more has stayed the same. And he was welcomed to a lot of different homes and told about, everyone's circumstances. And I think that it helps that he both is and paints himself as someone who doesn't know anything and is kind of a dick. Because I think that when you read it, you really get the sense for how much more so should anyone with any social conscience be distressed by this. And I don't know. I think it's worth noting that I'm not saying this because, it's an important book. People say this about every book that ever comes up. It's an important book. You should read it because it's important. I just think you should read this because it's an exceptionally well done piece of graphic nonfiction on the subject. It takes you to the actual location, and you get to hear from people who are actually physically there through his, writing about them. And I think it's very honest. It really covers every day, almost every hour of his stay there. And at the end, he goes back into, what's considered Israel, and speaks to some Israeli women. And I think that what they have to say about the situation is the most revealing of all. It was just a really excellently done book. There's so many books on Palestine, and it's not like there are any that I specifically wouldn't recommend or anything, but this is one that I think is absolutely a must-read for anyone who's interested in learning about what's been going on for decades. And also, I think if you just are open to graphic nonfiction in general, this is one of the big works in the genre. This has been on my list for a very long time. Joe Sacco in general is kind of a legend in the field. I'm very, very glad that I finally read it because it was very good. Also printed in a very nice, very large, this is a heavy book, both, emotionally and, the content, but also that it's literally a very physically large book, which was necessary because of the amount of detail, the way that the text often overruns the images. It's a very good use on a meta level of the format and the medium. So I highly recommend this as well. Chouette by Clara Shetsky. So, okay, I have to confess something, which is that I had a reading on the 6th of January 2024, and the person who was reading after me was Clara Shetsky. And when I saw this was happening, I picked up Chouette because I actually had a copy nearby, and I read the first chapter. I did love it, but I read the first chapter so that when they'd bought a signed copy, they'd pre-ordered one before the event, and I wrote a little post-it in the book. They're like, oh, by the way, I'm reading Chouette and I'm a big fan. Which I was already, but then I finished it and oh my god, it was so good. And the event, actually the event they were having was for Poor Dear, which was not out yet at the time. This is a really interesting book, and talking about it is itself really interesting. Because I've now met practically everyone involved in the situation at this point. So this is about, in a roundabout way, Clara Shetski's experience giving birth to and then raising Patricia Taxon, who famously is autistic. Again, it's not, you could possibly skew it towards autofiction, but it is also really just a novel. Our protagonist slept with a female owl lover and gave birth to an owl baby. And everyone keeps insisting that you can make this baby into a human if you just do enough ableist abuse to it. And the protagonist is not willing to do that. It's really harrowing in a lot of ways, and it's a really, I think, important look at the realities of the abusive industry surrounding autistic children from the perspective of a parent who doesn't want to hurt their child, right? Because we get so much from parents of autistic children. It's like, oh my God, it's such a curse that my child's autistic and whatever the hell else. And I really had never read anything before from a parent that was just like, yes, my child's autistic, or in this case, an owl, and that's fine. And I love my owl baby, and I just want my owl baby to exist in a world where people can chill out about the fact that my child's an owl. What does it even matter? And the struggle of trying to get your child the accommodations they need, because every time that you engage with any, special ed program or whatever, their solution to everything is to just, basically sit on the kid and call the cops. I had a few people when I recommend this say that this made them nervous, which is understandable, because everyone has heard more than enough from parents of autistic children. First of all, I think it's important to note that it turns out that Clara Shetski is also very autistic, and they just didn't realize at the time of writing this book. But also that, I think more importantly, to me reading this book as someone who was some type of child, it was just so cathartic to read about this from the perspective of a parent who just is okay with the fact that their child's autistic. There's no problem to them with that. The problem is with the world and with the way the world wants to treat their child. And I just had never read anything like that before. Also, there's a subplot in this book that just feels like it was written for me. It's just very, I'm not going to, no spoilers, but lesbian housewives. I also have to note that my favorite behind-the-scenes piece of information about this book was that when they were pitching this book to agents and editors and so on, the biggest piece of you should change this feedback that Shetski was getting was not, well, how could the human character have sex with an owl and have an owl baby? It was, how could she have sex with a female owl and have an owl baby? The owl lover should be male. Which I think just kind of sets the tone for the entire situation. It seems like my my streaming thing is just not showing the covers anymore. Hold on, let me try to fix this. I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, you know what it might be? Okay, let's try this. Can we see it now? Incredible stuff, folks. I'm so sorry. I don't know why it's the same setup. Oh! Okay, I don't know what I did. My apologies. In case you missed anything, Ash's Cabin, Daddy Issues, Palestine, and Chouette. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I thought that maybe I was just getting some kind of error on my end where I couldn't see it, but anyway, Chouette, it is a very pretty cover. It's a lovely cover. Very good book. Recommend it. If you want a book where you're going to be asked to handle the logic of sleeping with a female owl lover and getting pregnant with an owl baby, this is the book for you. And the audiobook uses some music from Patricia Taxon, which is a cute little bonus note. Okay. Objects of Affection by Taylor Titmouse. This is also getting cut off, which is unfortunate. It's a very cute cover. This is I'm going to kind of just warn for everything. It's an explicit book. It's a dark book. 3 stories about, let's say, robot girls, um, that raise a lot of interesting questions. But I think that the most important one, the one that I've been turning around the most since, has been before something that Taylor Titmouse, the author, said on Tumblr when asked about this book. Before we consider the question of do female robots have rights, we should ask, do women have rights? And that colors the entire book in a really beautiful way, in a very upsetting way at times. That these are figures that are decidedly not women because they are not people, but they are shaped like women, and they are, part of their selling point is the question of how much they are or not like human women. So you can probably guess, when I say like warning for everything, like, what I'm warning for. But it's really beautiful. I read this and I was just thinking a mile a minute because I'm also writing a lot of things about, robot autonomy and whatever else. And I'm really still surprised by how much I've been thinking about this since I read it. I will also say that I need to reread this as soon as possible because I really feel like, as much as I enjoyed it, I didn't get everything out of it I could have. That on a second read, I would see so much more. Because on the first read, it was a good book and it was fun to read and it was, well, fun, fun and haunting to read. And I think it did everything it came to do. But I think I also didn't pick up on a lot of the subtler political, even literary, just themes throughout the book. There is some really, especially if you are, to put it one way or another, a robot fucker, definitely the book for you. And also, I would say people who prefer, I hate saying like intelligent erotica because then it makes it sound like most erotica is unintelligent. But if you like to read things that don't shy away from having sex in them, but also don't shy away from having big complex themes, this is also the book for you. If you are not afraid of having a sexy moment when you are being distressed and horrified at what's on the page, and if you're not afraid of being distressed and horrified at what's on the page while you're having a sexy moment, this is a book for you. Wow, okay, this is, the way it's cut off is pretty insulting, but fortunately I have a link to this one on the web, and you can read the entire thing for free, and I highly recommend that you do. I also recommend you buy it and support, the project. This is the 4th book from Silver Sprocket on this list, but who's counting? And first of all, I just have to say thank you to Silver Sprocket for hosting this for free on the internet because it is so important. And I've said important like 4 times during this stream, but this is one of those things where a lot of people literally need this on a daily basis. I really appreciated the specificity. I will say that I'm not a trans woman, but the fact that a lot of things that will work for cis women. For example, the classic, if someone's groping you, then hold up their hand and yell at their pervert or whatever, just doesn't work for a lot of trans women because the public is not necessarily on their side. And especially right now, just a way to deal with all of the different situations you may wind up in, from, someone misgendering you to being perhaps physically violent with you, but also even if you're at a bar and this woman starts, sort of grabbing your arm and you want her to let go, but you feel like you can't just say, let go of me, because now you're escalating the situation, even though you have just been, touched without your consent. How to get out of that kind of hold without looking like you're doing it. Just very, very, very good. This is one that I bought just in the moment from Silver Sprocket's store in SF in Pride Month. And I've recommended it to everyone I know. I'm making sure that everywhere around carries it. It's so, I'm not trying to say, oh, read this book because it's important, but I mean, literally funnel money towards this project because this is the kind of thing that we need to, especially right now, be putting resources towards. And this is something that a lot of people need. So if you can afford it, I really highly recommend buying a physical copy. It's just a zine. It's a really lovely zine. and, funding the ability of Silver Sprocket to put stuff like this on the internet for free so that any trans woman can see it. And I also recommend that if you know anyone in your life who could use this, send it to them, because there's a lot of stuff in here that I didn't know. There are a lot of things that I know have helped people that I'm close to. So I would really, really, really recommend that you support this book any way you can and spread it around. The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Okay. I will say that this is not... I should have read his earlier books first, not because this doesn't read well without that context, but I intended to do that. I intended to do it the whole time. I kept seeing them around, and I thought, well, okay, this is clearly something that has to be on my list. But you know me, and if something's on my list, it will take me approximately 5 years minimum to read it. And this came out this year, and he was invited on, I think it was Good Morning America, and honestly, practically just a racist interrogation. I don't want to call it an interview. It was really horrible, about this book. I believe that the white anchor said that he was shocked to see someone who's so intelligent, saying things that, if he didn't know whose name was on this book, he would have thought it was written by any terrorist. And it was like, okay, well, that's crazy to say to someone you invited on your show to talk about their book, but thank you for that, white person. So I went home and I read it, because I was like, okay, what is he talking about? And it's not going to shock anybody, but it doesn't read that way. It doesn't read that way at all. I don't know what this man was on about, and I think it was just kind of a classic, if anyone sympathizes with Palestinians, then we just have to call them a terrorist because we're not allowed to listen to them for some reason. This has been a bestseller, I should say. I think in part because of that heinous situation, but also fortunately because it's just a really good book. And I think particularly one of the things that I haven't seen said about this book very much is that it is a book on writing. Coates writes this ostensibly... There's a lot of second-person address here to a presumed class of Black undergraduates, because he does teach. And I appreciated particularly that he's discussing, what is the point of writing? What is the job of the writer in the modern day? What is the message? And so a lot of people talk about the side of this book that is, the major elements of, drawing comparisons between the Black American experience and the Palestinian experience, and even the Jewish-Israeli experience, which I don't think I saw a lot of discussion of, but I particularly appreciated as just a Jewish American, particularly a white Jewish American, that he discusses the ways in which an oppressed people can use nationalism to do heinous things, or even just to support heinous things. And I appreciate that he was talking about this real comparison point between some nationalist movements of Black Americans and obviously, the whole Israeli project, and how it relates to Jewish Americans. And I just thought that it was one of the best pieces of writing I've ever read on that subject. It really blew my mind. But also, even beyond this, right? Even beyond what I would argue is, like the meat of the book there, it's really, really good as a text on writing. I really think this should be taught alongside, your classic... I recommend Save the Cat to everyone. But I think also if you're going to talk about, well, the role of the writer in modern society, this is a really interesting look at it. And I don't say that just, uncritically because I agree with everything he said, because I do think that it really comes from there's a traditional published author perspective here, and that does color what he's saying, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think you just get a sense for, how an individual author's perspective is going to affect everything they do just based on how their work is published and how it is disseminated. He talks about, the banning of his books. I'm getting too much into everything that happens in this book, but it's a really good book. It's also really short, and I read it very quickly. I was in a reading slump at the time, which sounds fake because I read 100 books last year, but, we all have our moments. And everything that I read, I either didn't like or I couldn't appreciate it to, its fullest extent. I would read it and think, well, this is probably a really great book, but I just hate everything right now. Or I just couldn't read. I would be reading things and think, this is probably good, but I just can't read right now. I can't look at a word and have it come into my brain and do anything. And this was the first book that I read in that moment that just launched me out of it, catapulted me back into being able to read because it was so good. It was so concise and well written, and his prose is excellent. Okay, I'm done. But it's very, very good, and I recommend it. And if you've heard praise for it, the praise is more than warranted. Also, a really great cover. Just especially in person, the texture of the cover is really got a wonderful feel to it. Stag Dance. Okay, we've hit number 1. I probably should have said this is our top 5, this is our top 3, but this is our number 1. This is Stag Dance. It's not out yet. It is coming out March. I believe March 11th. Pre-order this book now. Read Detransition Baby, and then buy Stag. You have time, because I know there's someone right now who's listening who has not read Detransition Baby, and that is a mistake in their life. So read that book. You have time. You have a month to read that book, and then Stag Dance will come out, and then you'll read Stag Dance, and your head is going to explode. I'm pausing because I assume that you need a moment to look up this book at your local independent bookstore of choice and put it in your cart. You should buy and read both Detransition Baby and Stag Dance. Okay, I'm done. I will say, Tori Peters coming to San Francisco, but the tickets are like $70+, and it's not on a day that I think I even have off, and it's either right after or right before. This was shocking to me. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie reading is like my 9/11 of this year. I cannot believe that's happening, and I cannot believe that that was allowed to happen, but that's none of my business. And I should clarify, I'm not mad at Tori Peters for that, because she has no control over what other insane people they choose to read. But it was particularly shocking to me because this book is so out there about the transgender experience, and I know everyone hates that phrase. Bear with me. Particularly the trans femme experience, I should say. But this book, if you read Detransition Baby and you were like, wow, I mean, that was really good, but I can't believe that she said that, and they let her say all of that. This is that, but like on a drastically greater scale. I've been really impressed and heartened by the advanced praise for this, and like I said, the extremely expensive author events they're having for her. But it's also kind of strange, because I just don't think that any cisgender person is going to even appreciate this book anywhere near the level that it is on. It's so distressing at times. It's equal parts, I think, cathartic, but also, it's going to depict some things that are incredibly, incredibly difficult to read, but are, I don't know, it was so rewarding to read, I suppose might be the word that I would use, that these situations that trans women are put in were acknowledged, and they're not shied away from, and at the same time, there's just so much love towards every trans woman, every trans woman in this book. And even as I say that, there's also a lot of criticism of things that come from within the community. Just really a strange thing to say, but tactfully done also. It's somehow both tactful and also completely unconcerned with how it may be received. I think that one of the best ways I found to pitch this is that if you read Detransition Baby and you're like, wow, this person's on something else, that the place that she was at with Detransition Baby is very clearly, she's discussed writing it as an argument with herself. This question of, do I actually transition, or do I just stay as, a closeted trans woman forever, and what are the pros and cons and so on? And not just that, but just what would be the fallout. And Detransition Baby basically explores that fallout. However, we can't all be in the same mental place for our entire lives. And I think that's one of the things I appreciate most about Stag Dance, is that I really got the sense of temporality from it. That this reads like what the woman who wrote Detransition Baby would be thinking about after she wrote Detransition Baby. Later in her transition, more in community with other trans women, the concerns of a trans woman who, and I think that we all relate to this in some ways, where you're like, awesome, I found my people, everything's gonna be great. Surely this is the end of the story, and now everything's gonna be wonderful. And then it isn't, because it turns out people suck everywhere. It's kind of classic to say, diversity when this gay person's annoying, but this book, oh my god, it's such a revelation, the crabs in the bucket mentality. And I think that this is one of the things that I like most about it, is the extent to which it is so concerned with the material conditions of an individual trans woman, and the fact that trans women will always, always, always have so much pressure on them to not just individually not transition, to not just individually stay in the closet forever, but to push other trans women back into the closet, to abuse other trans women, to throw them under the bus, because that is at times it feels like the only way to not even get ahead, but to keep yourself afloat when everyone's treating you as a freak, is to point at someone else and say that they're actually the real freak and you're a normal, real woman. I'm sorry to say that happens repeatedly throughout this book, but it's just done so well. It's a collection of 4 short stories, novellas. They tried to tell me that the titular story is a novella. I don't believe that. I think it's just a long, beautiful short story. So we have, let's see if I can remember the order. And actually, I'm sitting right next to this book. Why don't I just open it? I've had this thing on my desk. I want to put it on my shelf, but I don't want it to be far away from me. To give you an idea of how obsessive I am about this book. It was my favorite book of last year. It's going to be my favorite book of this year because I'm going to reread it, most certainly. So we start with Infect Your Friends and Loved Ones, which is you could also call it a novella that was published, I think, like exclusively in the UK or something. It was very hard to find, and it went out of print almost immediately. An alternate future where everyone has to take hormones to have any hormones. No one has hormones anymore unless you take them. Does this make everyone trans? As it turns out, not really. It's a big negative, but we can dream. Very good. I should note that it's some of these flashbacks just like emotionally murdered me. It was such a good story for not just women's wrongs, but I think a lot of us, at least I, if a woman does something wrong in a book, I'll kind of just say, well, that's fine because she's a woman. But it is worth noting that sometimes women have reasons they did those things, and that context is useful to know. And this does a really good job of situating us in the everyday, banal suffering of so many trans women that are then, of course, when they fly off the handle and someone are treated as hysterical and crazy and aggressive and evil and masculine and whatever else. Followed by The Chaser. This story made me insane, made me a crazy person. It does such a good job of redefining the term chaser. And I say that just because I think that there's kind of been a drift away from what the original term was supposed to describe, which was not just someone attracted to trans women. I think that Kat Black has also spoken on this very well on her YouTube channel. Follow Kat Black. I'll promote anything during this stream. But the specific practice, not just even type of person, but the specific practice of pursuing trans women because of their vulnerability and because they are, a type of woman that you individually are allowed to abuse and no one will care. And particularly in this story, the extent of not just the suffering, but the ability to kind of sniff out a closeted trans woman and abuse her is just like, this is all really heavy stuff, but it's just so well written. It's so emotionally well written. It's so the coloring of the story through the narrator's lens is so good. I love that I didn't know how to label the narrator in terms of sexuality or gender. A lot of that back and forth game of how do I make the other person the freak so that they can be abused instead of me. It's really fascinating. I have to reread this one especially because I didn't know where to exist after this. Stag Dance, the titular story. Also, just you start reading this story and you just think to yourself, wow, well, I'm really in love with this character. And that means nothing bad will ever happen to her. And I'm sorry to say that has never been true ever in any Tori Peters story. And it's not going to be true this time. But my God, I felt like an idiot reading this because anytime something good happened, I'd be like, that's it. And now everything's going to be good forever. And that was never the case. And when I finished the story, I really had the sense of, almost a Shakespearean tragedy kind of inevitability to the entire narrative. On some level, even just this is not a doomer book, I don't think at all, but there are times I think where trans women are trying to explain their situations and people are so interested in offering, well, why don't you just do this? Well, I would have done this, and why don't you do that? at the end of the day, being a trans woman in many ways is limiting of what you can accomplish in society. And I think just anyone in any minority knows this. There are just certain circumstances where, you know, there's no right way to deal with it. There's no one secret thing you can do to get everyone to respect you. And this story is just the epitome of that. It did kill me dead. It did kill me. And the last story, The Massacre, I think is possibly the cleverest one. I kept, you know, my jaw dropped. I gasped. I was like, oh no, she didn't. The whole story long, I was really having such a great time, which is crazy because it is an insane story that is so upsetting because all of these stories are so upsetting. But it really is. This is like for, if you want books that you read to upset you intellectually, this is the collection for you. This is the collection for everyone. Everyone should read it. It's really good. You know, if you don't like this book, I don't like you. But man, was this last story just so, it really skewered some very specific types of thought in the trans community. And I think that it communicated best to me what Peter says in, I don't know if this is just for the arc, because I have an arc. Thank you, Tori Peters and Random House for the arc. But I think it is just the arc, which is so sad because I read interviews about this book because what she has to say about it is so interesting. Where Peter talks about how these are really thought experiments to her, right? And this is what I was trying to get at in a way with saying this is what happens when you write Detransition Baby and then you are a trans woman for longer and you have to think about new things. That whenever she had a dispute or disagreement or something would happen, she would work through it in fiction. You can really get that sense here in the best way possible, because you have to know that I'm the number one hater of stories where you go, oh, I know you had an argument and that you wrote this because you wanted to come out as right, and in your story, you're of course the genius correct person. That never happens. That never happens. This is the only time that I've seen someone very clearly work something out on the page mix and it not come across as insufferable. We get it, you had an argument with some other writer, and now you have to tell us all about it. And particularly that she wanted to not just break down the barriers between male and female, but the barriers between cis and trans. And not even to say that it's a spectrum, but to say that sometimes a person is in a liminal state of cisness and transness. And that, particularly, I think that this is something that I really came away with feeling that she doesn't say this too explicitly, but I think that this is one of the reasons that transgender women are such a complex position, is that, you know, there's this false choice presented of, well, if you just stay a closet trans woman forever, well, you'll just be treated like a cisgender man. And a lot of transgenders believe this, that you could just, the trans women who haven't come out yet are functionally identical to cisgender men, that they are treated with the exact same experience, same privilege, whatever else. And this is obviously not true. And I think that the people who know this the most are, you know, trans women who have been closeted for any period of time and who have seen that this is not really how they are treated, and that there was never really an option for them to have all of the, you know, the societal privilege or the social role of cisgender maledom or whatever. But it also means that you have this sense of falling from the highest rungs of gendered privilege to the lowest. And the fact that one can exist in this strange liminal space where it's not fully clear where you are is really disconcerting for that reason. I've just said a lot of things about this book. Just read the book. Just forget everything I just said. Read the book. It's going to be the best book you read this year. It's going to be the best book to come out this year. You know, the other books are coming out. It doesn't matter. No one knows. I do have a list of, you know, about 100 books that I'm very personally excited for. But I really, really doubt that anything is going to top Stag Dance. I really don't believe it's physically possible. I'm sorry. With that said, congrats to our #1 pick. Honorable mentions. Some things didn't qualify, but I want to talk about them anyway, and I think they're very good, and you should read them anyway. Here are the honorable mentions. Adversary by Budel Quanti. I already listed this. So you might be thinking, well, how can you list it twice? And that's a great question, so I cannot list it twice. But I did want to give it a bonus shout out because there's a new edition with, say it with me, folks, Silver Sprocket. . 'Cause, 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 because the original was a short box comic and then it was released on Del Quanti's itch.io. Really good. Really, really good. I'm trying to think how to describe this thing. I think just saying that there are so many books that do like, oh, and this person is using BDSM to cope, but that's not how they should be dealing with the situation, that are so insufferable and are so pretentious and come from someone who clearly thinks that all BDSM is, inherently dangerous to society, whatever the hell. This is the perfect book if you want someone to do BDSM in a fucked up way and you want to really be upset about it. There were people where I recommended this book and they were like, you didn't tell me that. I was like, I'm pretty sure I told you this was a very upsetting book. They were like, it's an upsetting book. I don't care. You should read it and be upset. It's really good. The BDSM elements are awesome. You can probably tell that there is some reference to COVID. I'm not really someone who at this point shies away from reading about COVID. I know some people do. I think it was, needlessly handled very well. And it was a really good book, particularly if you're like, how can we be moving on from COVID when it's still very much here? This is the book for you, especially if you are a gay trans man who has mental problems. Okay. But technically I did pitch it last year, but I couldn't not pitch it now that you can buy a beautiful new edition. So I'm going to say it twice. Bleed Any Percent, also by Blue Del Quanti. This was their short box comic for this year. It's actually why I even ventured into the short box comics zone. Highly recommend in general, short box comics. They do a comic fair, a digital comic fair every year, I believe in October. And I will say, save your money because start saving now because all of the comics are completely reasonable price. They're like, $2 to $5, but you will want all of them. I'm very, 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 very glad that I went in on so many. And this one in particular, I was loath to include it on my top 16 list because it's technically not out in physical form. That doesn't mean that neither is Objects of Affection, but this one particularly is already on Blue Del Quanti's itch.io, and I smell a physical edition. I don't know for sure. I obviously can't say for sure, but I was telling them, personally, please put this out because I will buy it. I will buy it. I will pitch it. I will sell it. I will give this. Please give us a physical edition. And I suspect because Adversary had a digital and a physical edition, a physical release with Silver Sprocket, I do suspect that this will come out sometime in the next couple of years. I shouldn't be presumptuous, but I also had to make cuts somewhere. Do you know what I mean? So I just had to put this on honorable mentions. But it is so good. Our protagonist is doing a VR run of a game that was only ever supposed to be played in a very specific, arena set up and supervised by the game devs. So that even though it's VR, all of the things would be where they're supposed to be, but you can really play it anywhere if you map things out correctly, which of course this protagonist has, and Samson, our main character, they are a speedrunner who's trying to play this in a crowded mall. And of course, all the mall cops are aware of people doing this kind of thing, and so they have to have someone watch out for them, and we go in and out of what they're seeing in VR and what's physically in the real space. Really, it's really cool. It's just like a really exciting read. It made me wish the game was real. I was really sad that I couldn't play it. I read it twice this year because, I read it once last and once before I did the stream. I reread it just so I could talk about it more because oh my gosh. I also, when I was rereading it before this stream, I was listening to A.G. Cook's beautiful 2023 edit, and it lined up so perfectly with the chase sequence at the end that I went and recommended that to Blue because I was just like, if you haven't read through your own comic while listening to A.G. Cook's beautiful, you should do that. It's really interesting. So I recommend that you buy this from Blue's itch.io and that you read it while listening to Beautiful by A.G. Cook. Specifically the 2023 version. I think it is better, but I also just think that it fits really excitingly. Okay. Kareshi Tokidoki Karojo, or boyfriend, sometimes girlfriend. I'll put it in the chat because I understand that I'm showing you a cover that's in Japanese. So for those of us who stalk the non-MOA tag on Dynasty Reader, this is for you. Is this Yuri is kind of the central question of our age, I think. I read this year and I just became obsessed immediately. Every month I open the Dynasty Reader page for it and I check whether they've updated. And I'm sorry to say that, to be clear, it's because the chapters are really long. And so it takes a long time to translate and scan, and it's a lot of work. I'm not trying to be ungrateful, but I'm also going to die if I don't get to finish this immediately. The last release was November 14th, 2024, of a scanlated chapter. Let me link you directly, because I can. So I don't know if it's ever going to get a physical English release. And one of the reasons on the honorable mention list is that, I'll be honest with you. So the plot here is that our protagonist on the right gets really into this random high school girl who he, quote unquote, he keeps talking about how she's so beautiful and she's so perfect and anything that she does, sure, whatever. But she is very much just a girl who's pretty in a Yuri manga. And her family is cursed so that when, quote unquote, men kiss them, they turn into women for 24 hours. I don't even think it might just be a few hours, but it's, that poses a problem to some people, but not to our intrepid protagonist, for whom anything is worth it. This is obviously kind of a deranged premise, and I am loath to pitch this because I understand that I'm kind of entering the realm of, if you've ever met a trans woman who's really into gender bender manga, this is like kind of peak gender bender manga, and it should be stated outright that I don't think this character is like trans textually. I don't care though, because I feel like they're a little too blasé about turning into a woman all the time. That's just my personal opinion, and reading it through that lens is, for me, rewarding. I am very sad to report that this manga only got 3 volumes before it was abruptly canceled. So the 3rd volume, from what I've heard, ties things up in a kind of rushed fashion just because the mangaka couldn't do anything else. And just the 1st volume, and I'm reading, I think the scanlation is like halfway through the 2nd volume. Things get weird very quickly because I think that the author's trying to get more people on board, and so tried to just like throw things in there. So I felt like I couldn't really put this in this isn't one of those books where I'm just like, this is one of the best books ever written. But also, what if it is? What if it is? I had such a good time reading it. I'm so obsessed with it. I want to read the whole thing immediately. It's so good. I'm also realizing something else about things that I read this year that I think I did not log. And it's just so on brand to look through all the things I read this year and think, okay, well, I made sure to get everything right. And now I'm realizing, I think I didn't get the entire manga innocent. And I'm just having a moment thinking, how is it that I went through so much strife over how many books I had or had not read, and I went through and edited things after the fact because of my Goodreads export, so I was going through that with a fine-tooth comb, and I seem to have somehow missed... Okay, well, in true Yves fashion, I'm going to take a quick detour to talk about a different manga that I just remembered I've read. Damn it! This hurts me so much. Let me see if I can find a specific edition that I've been individually selling people on, because there's like a books 1 and 2 thing. Yes, the omnibus. Okay. I also, and I think Theo has been put through enough about this one, so I'm just going to sneak in here. I started reading this manga that fictionalizes the biography of the royal executioner of Paris in the 1700s. Well, I say the one of them, and of course he's this like limp, pathetic, effeminate man who doesn't want to be the executioner, but he has to do it for his father. And there's, oh my god, I can't get into the family politics of this one, but it's very dark. And I will say that if you have to be at a specific cross section of person to really get into this. I think there's like, mind you, I don't care about like a historical thing a lot of the time, contrary to what it may look like with Kay Rainier. But if you have a complicated family situation and you like seeing men tormented, this is the manga for you. Very dark. The illustrations are beautiful and gory, sometimes gorier because they won't show you what's going on. I think there's a moment where they, instead of showing you this guy's bones coming out of his sockets, they just have a panel of like a carrot snapping into, which was so heinously effective. I was really having a mental health day when I started reading this, and I think that that's one of the reasons that I haven't finished it yet. But it is very good. It's very addictive, despite or perhaps because of the fact that you're constantly being shown gory 1700s executions. Oh, I'm so sad that I didn't include it on this list. Well, I'll put it in post. We'll add it in post. Okay, this is our last honorable mention. I didn't read this for the first time last year. It didn't come out last year. But the movie came out last year. And far be it from me to complain about anything. But please don't let the movie shape your understanding. Please read the book. Please read the book. Buy the book, read the book. Get the book, read the book. Read the book. I'm going to be very careful how I talk about this. The book is, let's just focus on the book for a moment. The book is so good. So I reread it because the movie was coming out. So I wanted to watch the musical, and to watch the musical, I wanted to reread the book, and so on and so forth. The book is the best out of the three, and it's not even a contest. It's not slightly, there's no argument about this, and I think that any allusion to the contrary is, I'm not going to go out and just start calling people racists for that, but it's the things that they did to the story. Anyway, but we're focusing on the positive here. This book is so good. It's hard to talk about because it really does, I think, work for everyone for different reasons, and I have run into a lot of people who like it for different reasons. There's definitely a strong lesbian contingent of fans for this book, and that's not an accident. It's a very lesbian book. It's a very bisexual book, I would actually say. All of the Alpha Glinda stuff it's there, it's on the page, it's very blatant. They're just not, like, getting married. And presumably, if you're reading Wicked, you're not expecting them to get married in the end. It should be known as a great gay text. I'm sad that it isn't. It's really, if you liked Gideon the Ninth, I've been comping this to that, which sounds a little strange, but I would say that it's kind of the fantasy side to what Gideon the Ninth is doing in, like, science fiction fantasy, where Gideon the Ninth is like, it's in space, and this is, it's in a kind of medieval-esque fantasy universe. If you like world building, you'll like the book. If you don't like world building, you'll still like the book because all the world building comes through in dialogue and action. It's never these, like, long expository chunks. You get everything you need from the way the characters interact with each other and what they say to each other and how they think about the world they're in, the decisions they make. If you like characters, you will like this book. If you don't like characters, you probably aren't. I mean, I don't know how I can help you, but if you like characters, you will like this book because all the characters are distinct. It has a large cast that never feels overwhelming. I've read this book twice, yes, but the first time I read it, I remember thinking, like, wow, there's an awful lot of people in this book, but the way that they are introduced and the way they are spaced out, there's just no point at which I can really imagine being confused. And I think one of the things that people talk about a lot in the adaptation from book to musical is the fact that Firo, in this book, I have to just really hammer this point home, is a man of color, and he's coded a few different ways. He's dark-skinned, he's maybe South Asian. There's a lot of, indigenous political stuff going on. It's hard to, obviously slap one label on anyone in this book, because it is a fantasy novel, but they combine his character with another character, another 1 to 3 other characters, depending on how you want to look at it, for the musical and the movie, and also make him white. But it's not necessary in the book, because the book has a space it needs to really spread out and use this cast well to give you a sense for the kind of people that live in this kind of world. If you're here for relationships, oh my god. I mean, this is what I'm saying, is I was so in an emotional space after rereading this year, this last year, I should say, that I was so distraught, that I needed to go literally read an erotic comics anthology about lesbians to feel okay again, because I was just I was angry, I was upset, I was nearly in tears. I think a normal person would be in tears. I'm just insane. It's so good. It's so good. Everything about it is so good. The pacing is so good. The prose is so beautiful. I've tried to keep an open mind to people's criticisms about this book, and I think that there's probably something you could say that I would agree with. But I every time someone tries to say they don't like the prose, or they don't like the style, I just get so mad. Every criticism I've heard where they were like, I wish that the scene wasn't in there. I just go like, you don't understand. It's integral to the theme of the book. Themes, I should say. Even just, if you go to the Wikipedia page for this book right now, there's a section for the question of evil. Where evil comes from, because this book is so obsessed with so many different, there's a theme of colonialism in this book. I just don't even know, not that that's particularly rare or that it should be rare, but it's just so well thought through, and there's so many things that Maguire is trying to do, and he does them all so well. It's just shocking to me. Every time I read this book, I'm amazed that someone pulled this off, because it is so ambitious and so good. And yes, I like this cover best. Fight me. It's also an honorable mention because not only did I not read it for the first time last year, but I read it partially last year and finished it this year, so does it really count? I don't know. Who's to say? At any rate, I had to recommend it because I love it so much. But I noticed that you all have failed to tell me about your favorite reads in the chat, and you should. Actually, I think that Kyle did. I'm sorry. Kyle, letting Kyle off the hook because he listed one. But everyone else should. Yes, you did, and I'm proud of you. And I've seen that book around, I think. I'm not much of a sports reader, which is why I like asking people, because I think that I get a better sense for what people are reading outside of my niches. You can tell this trended very hard towards fiction. I will say, final count is that 4 of the 16 top books were published by Silver Sprocket, and 5 or 6, depending on whether we count Bleed any percent before it's been officially. I should clarify, I don't have any intel on this one. I'm not saying this because I know it's going to be published. I'm just saying that I would be really shocked if Bleed any percent wasn't published by Silver Sprocket within the next couple of years, just because of everything wonderful going on in that direction. If you count that, it's 6 out of 20. So, whichever way you slice it, about 25% of the books that I presented to you today were published by one small indie queer comic press in San Francisco. I've been to their store. They have one store. It's not even that big. And they just make incredible, incredible work because they don't limit their artists. And there are many other Silver Sprocket books I could have listed. There are so many books that came out this year from Silver Sprocket that so many people were huge, huge fans of. Chromatic Fantasy I've heard a lot about, and I did read it and like it. There's, Prokaryote Season, which I need to still read. There's so many books that came out from this one press. Didn't really expect this to be the direction that I was going with this stream, but I will say, just, if I can encourage you to support one small, weird press, I would like to do that today. Whether it's, in person, and the staff is so nice. You should absolutely go to their store in person in SF if you can, if you're anywhere in the area. There's the link to their online space. They're so wonderful. Anyway, good to know. I will be doing it. I'm going to make the decision to keep the party going for a while, but stop the recording here, so we can hang out a little longer, and so that people watching the recording will feel enticed to come to future streams. I have no particular plans for the rest of our, we have about 10 minutes left of our planned time, but I'm very proud of us. We came all this way. I think that we found a nice halfway point between the chaos of the bracket and having too few books, perhaps. If I had been limited to 10, I really couldn't have limited to 10. I feel like it's been very difficult. The entire list, the entire bracket, everything is up on the original post link for this stream. I will link you there one more time. That's also where I'm going to be linking the recording of this stream. Tumblr is where I'm most active for all those watching this recording. So if you want to know what these things are happening, you really should follow my Tumblr. But you can also go into the yves Cord. Because I also announce things there. I have a ping role and everything else that you can use to be pinged when I have streams. And here's a link to that. It's also a Tumblr post, but the Discord link is in there. The information's there. And that's it for our recording today, and for my best reads of 2024.